Today is Friday, September 24th, 2021, which means it's Derelict Friday. Hello, fiendlings, how the hell are ya? Well, I would have an audiobook for sale today, but I found some issues during the QC. My deaf ass apparently didn't hear the cicadas outside, and the little bastards ended up on the recording. Just enough to annoy the ever-loving shit out of me, and therefore probably the listener. More retakes! I have to re-record at least one entire chapter, and probably more like 3. I swear this book is trying to kill me. In other news, the paperback edition of Derelict Trident is now for sale up at Amazon.com. Link is in the show notes to the entire saga. So if your Kindle library is missing any portion of the Derelict Saga, or your bookshelf is a little bereft of coolie goodness, head up there and rectify that situation immediately. If, however, you're waiting to hear about signed copies before you part with your hard-earned cash, then ignore everything I said. Hopefully I'll have an announcement about that next week. Now is the time for me to admit that I have a caffeine addiction. Luckily, CorpseCoffee.com has solved that caffeine addiction. I have to recommend you go to CorpseCoffee.com and check out their assortment of boutique coffees and teas, as well as their wonderful webcomic. Go up there, order you some Java juice, and tell them the Fiend Master sent you. With that, it's time for me to get back to it. Maybe see if I can get some more recording time in before the cicadas, leaf blowers, lawnmowers, backfiring cars, ambulances, screaming children, barking dogs, chirping birds, and farting cats destroy my recording. Well, there are no farting cats that I know of. Huh, Shadow? Do you fart? Yeah, he's ignoring me. He's a cat. Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again real soon. Here's episode 42 of Derelict Trident. Chapter 71. The cam feeds weren't working right, or maybe Dunn's visor had been damaged. Either way, the glittering jeweled stars that shined far beyond the Kuiper Belt looked slightly blurred as though seen through a water-stained window. Black, what did you do?
Our upgrades, Captain. All 3 S&R ships were upgraded with gravitic drives. Lieutenant Noble nearly discovered mine.
Dunn frowned. Let me guess, you didn't know that until now. He could hear a smile in her voice.
The Collective, sir.
Of course, she was right. Toys and supplies had been hidden far away at Uranus, just waiting for Blue. Who knew how many new devices or craft were being manufactured in the shipyards at this very moment? The Collective had certainly stacked the deck. How fast are we going?
10 times faster than I can travel using normal engines.
10 times? How are Oaks and I still alive? He asked dumbly.
My grav plates aren't just grav plates. A bonus of having a gravitic generator, sir. This is nearly my top speed before humans must be in stasis.
He blinked and a tired grin replaced his confusion. How fast could we reach Pluto if you topped out?
Less than a solar day,
Black said nonchalantly. Less than a day? Dunn tried to calculate the speed in his head and gave up. Too bad we don't have a day, he said.
Both Blue and I agree that we have very little time before the QM bay goes critical.
Are you matching speed with Blue?
Yes, Captain. However, it's tricky.
He imagined so. Without assistance, Oaks himself would have little chance of planning the burn sequences to keep the 2 ships and their payloads more than 200 meters from one another. If you fucked up, there was no forgiveness, no opportunity to adjust. The very thought left him cold. He activated the rear cam feed. Trident Station, or rather where a station used to be, had dwindled to little more than a shadowy dot reflecting Neptune's light. Even the gas giant was becoming smaller, looking more like Luna as seen from Earth. A moment later, the light changed. Neptune, the planet named for a god of the ocean, was draining away, just as their lights had in the presence of the exosolar creatures. The darkness descended over the planet, leaving a spherical black hole where the gas giant had once been. The sight paralyzed his mind, his skin prickling, his heart stopping in frozen terror. The universe was going out, just like in his dreams. Void. The word died in his mouth as a halo of light broke free from the shroud. More blue. Neptune shrugging off the creature's assault, piercing the veil and shining through. The darkness fled from the planet like smoke. Dunn felt confused. Was that an eclipse?
Sort of.
Black said.
That was an effect generated by the concentration of the remaining exosolar creatures. They have regrouped and are accelerating.
Oh, he thought. How soon until they catch up?
Less than 3 minutes. It occurs to me, sir, that the QM Bay itself may be serving a function identical to the beacon.
The beacon we crashed into Pluto.
Yes, sir.
That didn't make him feel better. At Pluto, the hordes of creatures had followed the beacon into the explosion when it struck the planetoid. From the data feeds Black had shown him, he assumed the creatures had been incinerated in whatever had caused the wave. But what if that hadn't been the case at all? What if that had energized them somehow, sent them all sailing on a photon storm further into Sol system? What if the trio had known that would occur? No, that couldn't be right. How would they have known how to create a beacon? Another question for Xi, another one he might not even answer. Xi said humanity had less than 100 years before the exosolar creatures reached and infested the solar system. That was, of course, had the trio not sped up the timeline. 100 years for humanity to reach a technological leap that their very own creations might have denied them. It's worse than that, Xi had said in his cheery, ironic voice. We know because they choose to tell us. Humanity wouldn't have stood a chance by themselves. Didn't matter. None of it mattered now. They had pulled the proverbial trigger, and in the next couple of minutes, something worse than Pluto was going to happen. The only question was whether or not the bomb Blue carried would be enough to keep another wave from being generated. Another wave might wake up everything as far as the Oort cloud. What's the plan, Black?
We will match speeds in 35 seconds. Blue and I will disconnect from our bays and continue accelerating. If we slow down, we'll be caught in the resulting explosion.
She paused.
That said, I have no idea what a safe distance might actually be.
Base it on the Pluto detonation, Dunn said.
We'll need at least a 30-second head start, sir.
The shroud was directly behind them now, the stars seeming to disappear and reappear in its wake, as if flickering in and out of reality. I take it things are out of my hands, he said.
Yes, Captain.
He managed a troubled grin. Do your best, and that should be enough. Black didn't respond at first. A new feed from Black's starboard cam appeared on his HUD. Blue was less than 300 meters away and looked like a remora affixed to a shark. Oaks, Dunn asked.
Aye, sir, I'm watching it. Still not believing it, but I'm watching it. Then again, you and I should have been pulverized into liquid and dust, so I guess at this point, I should just believe anything I see.
Dunn knew how he felt. Everything humanity understood of physics and of the universe itself had changed. Not only did humanity now know it wasn't alone in the universe, their newfound friends from outside the solar system were dangerous, genocidally so. Worse was the fact their very creations had rebelled, ceased functioning solely for the benefit of humankind. But beyond all of that was the fact that whatever their creations had evolved into, they were already far past humanity's capability in the realms of any of the sciences. Gravitic drives, quantum entangled communications, new sources of energy, and it was impossible to guess what else. For all he knew, the new race of sentience had already populated the stars. Blue slid closer.
Another 10 meters or so,
Oak said.
Should be flush then. Captain, Lieutenant,
Black said.
We will cease acceleration in a moment. Please prepare yourselves to enter stasis.
Dunn blinked. Stasis? Why? Black didn't pause.
Blue and I will have to accelerate at maximum speed in order to escape the event. Our gravity bubbles will not sustain you at those G-force levels unless you are in stasis. Once we cease acceleration, please head to the stasis bay as fast as you can. The creatures are still accelerating and will catch up to us quickly. 15 seconds.
Dunn quickly reviewed everything he'd need to do. Oaks would have a longer trip than Dunn would, Still, without gravity, he'd have to magwalk as fast as he could to the bay. Shit, he didn't even know if Black had any stasis fluid left. Did she?
5 seconds.
Black said. Oaks, don't bother with procedure. Just get into the damned pod as fast as you can.
Aye, sir.
The ever-present hum that he'd felt through his boots ceased.
Gravity drive disengaged. Please make haste.
The gravitational force holding him in place departed as though it had never been there. He released himself from the bulkhead and magwalked from the cargo bay. The ship rocked slightly. Black?
We are disengaged from the QM bays. Please hurry. Done?
LeBlanc's voice said over the comms. Go, he said, continuing on to the slip point that would take him to the crew deck.
The creatures are coming in fast.
So Black said. She was quiet for a moment, probably getting herself to her stasis pod. They were both about to jump into the pods along with their pilots, ignore the procedures, and probably not strip off a single piece of their suits beforehand. Was that even safe? He didn't know, but it didn't really matter now.
We have a problem?
LeBlanc said. Dunn had reached the stasis bay and stared at his pod. It was already open, liquid filling the reservoir. What's the problem? She cleared her throat.
Blue's spindle is jammed. She can't auto-release the hangar bays.
A chill ran through his bones. Oaks appeared in the hatchway, his rifle slung on his back. Black, Dunn said. Is there time for a manual release? 3 cam feeds appeared on his HUD. The first showed the shroud of darkness approaching. The massive conglomeration of creatures hadn't slowed at all, and their speed was terrifying. They'd reached the ships in a matter of minutes. The second cam feed was from Black's port side and showed Blue's spindle attachment on the hangar bay modules. He saw scorch marks as well as dented metal. The third feed was from Blue herself. Her cam showed S&R Black hovering a meter above the QM base. Black was completely free and untethered, meaning she could maneuver. While Blue was still connected, she couldn't do anything apart from accelerate.
I am at the manual release,
LeBlanc said, her breath nearly a pant.
Mechanisms are jammed. We might have taken a hit before we accelerated.
Dunn nodded, although she couldn't see him. That's what it looks like to me. He motioned to Oaks and pointed to the lieutenant's stasis pod. Oaks simply stood there. He switched to Oaks' private channel. Get in your pod, now. That's an order.
Sir, I can...
Now, Dunn said again, his voice a low growl. Oaks trudged toward the pod, but Dunn barely noticed. His eyes were flicking back over the cams. Black, can I use something to get her loose? Fire a weapon? Anything?
You can try, sir, but the event is coming.
She sent him a new feed from her belly cam. The QM bays glowed a dull red, the ammo steel heating beyond its tolerance. In a few moments, the most durable substance humankind had ever created would melt into slag. Black was right. The event, as she called it, was fucking nigh. Shit, Dunn said. He turned to make sure Oaks was getting into his pod. The pilot had already climbed in and taken off his helmet. Dunn nodded to himself and made for the hatchway. Make sure he doesn't get out of that pod, Dunn said to Black.
Acknowledged, sir.
Dunn magwalked as fast as he could. An adrenaline surge, probably the last one he'd have in this life, chased away both the physical and mental exhaustion that he'd looked forward to succumbing to. If he managed to get into stasis, everything would be over in one way or another. He'd either wake up in the stasis pod or not wake up at all. Join the void, he muttered. He reached the cargo bay, pulled the rifle from his back, and checked it. Black, open the cargo bay door. Use my cam feeds to adjust position.
Yes, Captain,
Black said. His breathing was a little faster than normal, and his heart rate had picked up. That last burst of adrenaline was still in his bloodstream. As the cargo bay door opened, slits of ambient light leaked through the widening space and caused his heart to jitter. The cargo bay door opened all the way, affording him a view of Blue and the hangar bays she clung to. Black couldn't move the ship lower without hitting the QM bays, and Dunn couldn't see the spindle connection from her current position. Black?
Hold on, sir.
The ship canted slightly, giving him a better angle, but he was still too far back. Dunn walked to the edge of the cargo bay, barely noticing the blurred stars beyond Blue. He lay prone, activated his boot magnetics to keep him moored, and sighted down the rifle. "Lucy," he called out over the comms. "I'm in position. You need to get into stasis."
No.
She said.
My pilot is in stasis. I'm staying right here until Blue is free.
He should have expected that. He would have said the same thing. An alert flashed on his HUD. Radiation warning. The QM bay was leaking rads now, and having the shielded cargo bay open meant the bay was getting a large dose, meaning he was too. Something flitted past the cargo bay. Another something passed less than a second later. He knew what they were. Starfish. The ship shifted again, the SI doing its best to give Dunn an angle. For the briefest of moments, Dunn saw the connection point to the spindle. By the time he pulled the trigger, the ship's position had changed, and the gravitic round hit Blue rather than the connection point, skating across her Atmos steel armor as though Dunn had shot a droplet of water at it. Another moment, another sighting, another missed shot. Zoomed in as far as he was, it was impossible for him to see what was going on in the world around him, apart from the weapon's cam feed. When the view from this side became occluded, he snapped his head up and looked through his visor with his own eyes. A starfish had breached black and spread its taloned arms across the cargo bay door, essentially cutting Dunn off from seeing anything. The creature pulsed. Dunn killed his mag boots and activated a suit thruster. The push of the nitrogen sent him spinning away aft. A stream of silver liquid lanced through where he'd just been and hit the hull. Particles and flecks of dissolved Atmos steel puffed out like dust. The huge starfish climbed into the hatch, its talons denting the Atmos steel as though it were a thin sheet of aluminum. It quickly located him and spat another stream of acidic death. Dunn hit his thrusters again, barely escaping the shot. He had time to bring up his weapon and pull the trigger, hip-firing and hoping the void wasn't quite ready for him yet. The gravitic rifle vibrated in his gloves, and the teardrop projectile rocketed out and struck the side of the cargo bay hatch. The round detonated and two of the starfish's arms disappeared. The force of the explosion knocked the starfish aside and tumbling out into space.
Done?
LeBlanc called. He moved back into position and tried to get a shot, but now there was another problem. While he'd been tangling with the intruder, 5 more starfish had reached them. All 5 were atop the hangar bay and attacking Blue. Rope after looping rope of silver sprayed onto Blue's hull.
Done,
LeBlanc said again. He aimed into the group of starfish and pulled the trigger 4 times. The 4 shimmering teardrops hit 2 of the creatures, detonating one into bits and knocking another off the ship. Before he had time to try and find the connection point, 3 more starfish had joined the attack.
We're out of time, Dunn,
LeBlanc said. He checked the aft cam. The shroud was so close now, the lights of the stars had dwindled to barely more than dark gray points against an utter and complete blackness. Black's cargo bay door began to close. Surprised, Dunn fired at it, thinking at first that another starfish had latched on to the ship. The droplet clipped the edge of the hatch, but found its way into empty space. "Black, what are you doing?" The cargo bay hatch finished closing, separating him from the darkness and the creatures and any chance of saving Blue. "Black!" Dunn screamed.
Please activate your mag boots, sir.
"What are you doing?" he yelled into the comms. "Open the fucking hatch!" The ZG suddenly disappeared and he crumpled to the Atmos steel deck. "What are you doing?" he screamed.
Activate your mag boots now, Captain, or you die,
Black said, her voice strangely cold and commanding. He had time to wonder if she'd just given him an order, but his mind obeyed her before he could stop himself. His gloves and boots locked to the deck. "Why? Why?"
Hold on, Captain.
Black said. Then Dunn was in hell.